The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual sounds of 1,000 different species preparing for their monthly meeting. Translators hummed softly as they converted clicks, whistles, and growls into understandable language. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the mix of gases that each species needed to breathe. Chancellor Vexthai of the Ethereal Collective floated into the chamber, his energy form shimmering blue in the artificial light. He had been leading these meetings for over 200 years, and today felt like any other day. Representatives from across the galaxy filled their designated seats, each designed for their unique biology. The aquatic tide speakers sat in their water-filled tanks, while the rock-like granite folk settled onto their heavy stone platforms. But something was wrong. Vexthai's energy form flickered with confusion as he noticed the empty space where the human representative always sat. Ambassador Sarah Chen had never missed a meeting in the 15 years she had held the position. Before her, Ambassador Torres had attended every session for 30 years. In fact, no human representative had ever missed a council meeting in the 300 years since Earth joined the galactic community. The Chancellor waited for 10 minutes past the scheduled start time, but the human chair remained empty. Finally, he called the meeting to order. Hoping the human delegate was simply running late, just as he was about to speak, a message appeared on the central display screen. "Attention, Galactic Council." The automated message began. "The Terran Republic formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately. All treaties, agreements, and obligations are hereby terminated. Humanity wishes the Council well in their future endeavors." The hall fell silent. Even the constant background noise of life support systems seemed muted. Representatives looked at each other with confusion and growing alarm. The message was short, official, and cold. There was no explanation, no list of complaints, no demands for change, just a simple statement of withdrawal. Commander Zektar of the Krillian Empire was the first to speak. His forearms gestured wildly as he stood from his reinforced chair. "This must be some kind of mistake," he growled through his translator. "The humans cannot simply leave. They have defense contracts with 17 different species, including my own empire." Trade Minister Quindal of the Zephyrian Commerce Guild rose next, her silver scales catching the light as she moved. "The economic implications are impossible to calculate," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Human ships carry 60% of all interstellar trade. Their currency backs the Galactic Standard Exchange. Their banks hold the savings of billions of beings across the galaxy." Chancellor Vexthai tried to maintain order as more representatives began speaking at once. The collective had always prided themselves on their calm wisdom, but even he felt a growing sense of panic. He sent an immediate communication request to Earth, then to the human colonies on Mars, Europa, and the outer worlds. Each attempt received the same response. "Communication channel terminated by user request." Dr. Hivness of the Academic Assembly pulled up her research files on her floating datapad. As one of the few beings who had studied human history and culture, she had always found them fascinating. "In all my research," she announced to the growing chaos, "humans have never acted without reason. They are not an impulsive species. This withdrawal must have been planned for some time." The realization began to sink in as the representatives thought about what Dr. Hivness had said. If the humans had been planning this withdrawal, it meant they had been quiet about it for months, maybe years. But why? What had changed? Trade Minister Quindal's assistant, a small rodent-like being called Pick, ran up to her with a datapad full of financial reports. His whiskers twitched with nervousness as he spoke. "Minister, I have been checking the trade records. For the past 6 months, human ships have been canceling long-term contracts and refusing to book cargo runs beyond the current quarter. We thought it was just a business adjustment." Commander Zektar received a similar report from his military intelligence team. Human peacekeeping forces had been gradually pulling back from conflict zones, handing over responsibilities to local security forces. The Krillian Empire had actually praised the humans for helping train local forces to be more independent. Now that independence felt like abandonment. As the hours passed and more information came to light, a disturbing pattern emerged. The humans had not just left suddenly. They had been quietly and carefully removing themselves from galactic affairs for months. They had fulfilled all existing contracts before canceling them. They had trained replacements for their peacekeeping forces. They had even transferred their medical research to various species health organizations, claiming it was to promote scientific independence. What the Council had seen as helpful human generosity had actually been humanity preparing for departure. The Chancellor called for a recess while the species tried to understand what had happened. In small groups, representatives compared notes and shared concerns. The Aquatic Federation's speaker realized that human engineers had been the ones maintaining the underwater habitat systems for land-dwelling species who visited their worlds. The silicon constructs discovered that human programmers had been writing most of the translation software that allowed different species to communicate. Even more troubling was the discovery that humans had been quietly mediating disputes that other species didn't even know existed. Border tensions between neighboring systems, trade disagreements between competing guilds, resource conflicts over mining rights. Humans had been solving these problems before they could grow into larger issues. As the Council reconvened that evening, the full scope of humanity's role in galactic civilization began to become clear. They had not just been another member species. They had been the glue holding the entire community together. Chancellor Vex Tai's energy form had dimmed considerably as he addressed the assembly. "We must face the truth," he said. "We have lost more than just another council member. We have lost the species that made galactic cooperation possible." The Great Hall buzzed again. But this time it was not with the usual sounds of preparation for business. It was with the sound of hundreds of species beginning to panic about their future in a galaxy without humans. 3 months had passed since humanity's sudden departure from the Galactic Council, and the cracks in galactic civilization were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as confusion and concern had grown into real problems that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. The first major crisis erupted in the Kepler sector, where the Aquatic Federation and the Silicon constructs had been neighbors for over 1,000 years. Their two species could not have been more different. The Aquatic Federation was made up of water-breathing beings who lived in vast ocean worlds, while the Silicon constructs were artificial life forms that existed as pure energy inside crystalline bodies. For centuries, they had argued about the ownership of 3 small planets that sat on the border between their territories. These worlds had unique properties. They contained both the deep water caverns that the Federation needed for breeding grounds, and the rare crystal formations that the constructs used to create new members of their species. The dispute had never escalated, because human mediators had always stepped in before things got serious. Ambassador Chen and her predecessors had worked tirelessly to create sharing agreements that let both species use the planets without conflict. Human engineers had even built special facilities that allowed both species to work on the same world safely. But now, there were no human mediators. The Aquatic Federation's military commander, Admiral Depthsinger, decided that without human protection, his people needed to secure their breeding grounds. He ordered Federation forces to claim all 3 disputed planets. The Silicon construct's collective consciousness, known as the Unity Core, viewed this as an act of war and sent their own forces to defend what they considered their territory. The first battle lasted only 6 hours, but it destroyed one of the shared facilities that humans had built. Hundreds of young Federation swimmers died when their breeding pools were contaminated by destroyed crystal fragments. Dozens of newly formed constructs were shattered when their crystal bodies could not handle the pressure waves from Federation sonic weapons. Chancellor Vex Tai tried to organize a peace conference, but it quickly became clear that without human mediators, the other species could not find common ground. The ethereal collective's way of thinking was too different from both the Federation and the constructs. When Vex Tai suggested compromise, Admiral Depthsinger replied, "Your people exist as pure thought. You cannot understand the physical needs of beings who must eat, breathe, and reproduce." The Unity Core's response was equally dismissive. Biological creatures are driven by emotion and instinct. They cannot think with the pure logic required for fair negotiation. While the Council struggled with this conflict, other problems began appearing across the galaxy. The trade routes that connected distant worlds had always been protected by human patrol ships. These ships had never been military vessels. They were simply cargo haulers with human crews who were willing to help other ships in distress, and who had a reputation for being too stubborn to run from pirates. Pirates had always avoided human-protected routes, because humans had a strange habit of chasing criminals across multiple star systems until they were caught. Other species thought this was wasteful and inefficient, but it had kept the trade routes safe for everyone. Now those routes were unprotected, and pirate activity increased by 300% in the first month after humanity's departure. The Zephyrian Commerce Guild tried to hire private security forces, but it was too expensive to protect every route. Trade between distant worlds began to slow, as cargo ships refused to take risks without protection. The situation became worse when the security forces that different species hired began fighting each other. The Krillian Empire's military contractors were extremely effective but had no patience for the careful approach that other species preferred. When a Krillian patrol ship encountered pirates attacking a Zephyrian cargo vessel, they destroyed the pirate ship completely, killing everyone on board. This shocked the other species, who had been used to human peacekeepers who would capture pirates alive and turn them over for trial. The Zephyrians complained that the Krillians were too violent. The Krillians replied that the Zephyrians were too soft to survive in a dangerous galaxy. Dr. Hivness of the Academic Assembly tried to study these growing problems, but she quickly discovered another issue. The great research projects that had advanced galactic knowledge for centuries were falling apart. Humans had been the primary funders and coordinators of most interspecies research efforts. The Galactic Disease Research Center had been jointly operated by 17 different species, each contributing their unique biological knowledge, but the center's budget had been 70% funded by human universities and companies. Without that funding, the center could not afford to maintain its advanced laboratories or pay for the expensive materials needed for research. Even worse, the research projects required constant cooperation between species with very different ways of thinking. Human researchers had been the translators, not just of language but of concepts and ideas. They had a unique ability to understand how different species approached problems and help them work together. Dr. Silt Hara of the Fungal Collective discovered this problem when trying to continue her work on plant diseases. Her species understood biological systems through chemical signals and slow, patient observation. Her research partner, Engineer Sparknall of the Lightning Folk, understood systems through rapid electrical analysis and quick testing. For years, a human scientist named Dr. Rodriguez had helped them combine their different approaches into breakthrough discoveries. Without Dr. Rodriguez's help, Dr. Silthara and Engineer Sparknall found they could not even communicate effectively about their work. The Fungal Collective's concept of slow chemical changes over months could not be translated into the Lightning Folk's understanding of rapid electrical processes measured in microseconds. Similar problems appeared in every joint research project across the galaxy. The Universal Translation Project, which had been working to create better communication systems for all species, stopped functioning when the human linguists who coordinated the effort were no longer available. The Galactic Mapping Initiative, which had been charting safe routes through dangerous space, ended when human explorers who had been leading expeditions into unknown regions disappeared along with their ships. As the months passed, reports began reaching the Council about human activity in their former territories. Long-range scanners detected massive construction projects in the outer systems of human space. Huge shipyards were being built, far larger than anything humans had ever constructed before. The ships being built were not the familiar cargo haulers and exploration vessels that other species knew. They were enormous vessels of unknown design. Intelligence reports from species with advanced sensor networks suggested that humans were not just building ships, they were building entire fleets. Some reports claimed the ships were larger than anything in the known galaxy, designed for long-range travel beyond the edge of known space. The most disturbing report came from a Zephyrian spy ship that had tried to get close to the human systems. The ship had been detected while still several light-years away, and had received a polite but firm message from an automated human defense system. This space is restricted to authorized personnel only. Please alter your course immediately, or you will be escorted away. The spy ship had changed course, but not before its sensors detected something that shocked the Zephyrian crew. The human systems were being evacuated. Entire colonies were being packed up and loaded onto the massive ships. It was not just the government or military leaving, it was everyone. Humanity was not just withdrawing from the Galactic Council. They were leaving the galaxy entirely. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy was falling apart in ways that no one had imagined possible. What had started as border disputes and trade problems had grown into a complete breakdown of the civilization that had taken thousands of years to build. The economic crisis hit first and hit hard. The Galactic Standard Exchange, which had allowed different species to trade with each other using a common currency system, collapsed when panic selling began. Without human banks to provide stability and without human arbitrators to settle disputes about exchange rates, different species started refusing to accept each other's currency. Trade Minister Quindal of the Zephyrian Commerce Guild stood in her empty office, looking at reports that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Entire star systems were reverting to primitive barter systems, trading raw materials for food and basic supplies. The complex financial instruments that had allowed species to invest in each other's futures were worthless now that no one could agree on their value. "How did we not see this coming?" she asked her assistant Pick, who was frantically trying to calculate how much the guild had lost. "We thought we understood economics. We thought we were the masters of trade and commerce." Pick's whiskers twitched nervously as he looked up from his calculations. "Minister, I have been studying the old records. It appears that humans were not just participants in our economy, they were the foundation that made it possible. They were the only species that every other species trusted to be fair in their dealings. The crisis was even worse in the medical field. The Galactic Health Organization had been humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Human researchers had shared their medical knowledge freely with all species, while human doctors had worked tirelessly to understand and treat diseases that affected beings completely different from themselves. Now, without human medical support, several species were facing health crises that they could not handle alone. The insectoid swarms were dealing with a plague that affected their hive-mind connection. Without the neural interface drugs that human biochemists had developed, entire colonies were losing the ability to communicate with each other, leading to chaos and starvation. Queen Mother Buzz Click of the primary swarm had sent desperate messages to every medical facility in the galaxy, but no other species understood insectoid biology well enough to help. The human researchers who had specialized in cross-species medicine were gone, and their laboratories were empty. The situation became critical when the plague spread to 3 more insectoid colonies. Without the ability to coordinate as a hive mind, the insectoids could not organize food distribution or maintain their technology. Millions of insectoids were dying not from the plague itself, but from the collapse of their society. Similar medical crises affected other species across the galaxy. The crystal beings of the inner rim were suffering from a condition that made their bodies crack and crumble. But human geologists who understood crystalline structures were no longer available to help. The gas giants' floating cities were experiencing atmospheric poisoning that only human atmospheric engineers had known how to prevent. But the most serious problem was the complete breakdown of the knowledge-sharing system that had allowed galactic civilization to advance. The Great Library of Galactic Knowledge had been maintained on Earth, with backup copies in human facilities throughout their territory. It contained the collected scientific and cultural knowledge of every species in the galaxy, freely available to anyone who needed it. Dr. Hivness discovered the scope of the disaster when she tried to access research files about ancient civilizations. The library's main servers were no longer responding to requests. When she managed to contact the backup facility on Mars, she received an automated message. "Library services have been discontinued. All data has been transferred to local species databases." The problem was that most species had only kept copies of research that directly affected them. The Aquatic Federation had kept copies of oceanographic research, but not geological surveys. The Silicon Constructs had maintained engineering databases, but not biological studies. The comprehensive, interconnected knowledge base that humans had maintained was gone. Worse yet, many species had not even realized how much they depended on the human-maintained library. Dr. Silthara of the Fungal Collective discovered that her own species' research had been stored primarily in the human system. When she tried to access decades of her own work, she found that her people had only kept basic summaries. The detailed data, the complex analysis, the connections to other species research, all of it had been stored in the human library and was now lost. The breakdown of cooperation became violent when the Krillian Empire decided to take direct action. Commander Zektar convinced his government that the galaxy was becoming too dangerous and chaotic to ignore. If other species could not maintain order, then the Krillians would impose it by force. The Empire launched what they called stability operations in 12 different systems. Krillian battle fleets moved in to establish military control over trade routes and settle disputes by force. Their approach was simple. The strongest species in each system would rule, and everyone else would follow their orders or be destroyed. This triggered a wider war as other species formed alliances to resist Krillian expansion. The Aquatic Federation joined with the gas giant collectives to fight against Krillian control of space routes. The Silicon constructs allied with the crystal beings to protect their mining operations from Krillian seizure. Chancellor Vexthai tried desperately to organize peace negotiations, but the different species could no longer even agree on basic principles. The Krillians believed that might made right, and that conflict was natural. The collective species believed in shared decision-making but could not understand individual motivations. The individualistic species demanded personal freedom but refused to accept any common rules. Every attempt at negotiation failed because the species had fundamentally different ideas about fairness, justice, and cooperation. The humans had somehow been able to bridge these differences and find solutions that everyone could accept, but no other species had that ability. As the first year of humanity's absence ended, reports began arriving that shocked even the most pessimistic observers. A coalition of desperate species had decided to attempt the unthinkable. They would travel to human space and demand that humanity return to help fix the crisis. The expedition was led by Admiral Depthsinger of the Aquatic Federation, supported by ships from 6 different species. They had spent months planning the mission and gathering the most advanced technology available to make their demands impossible to ignore. But when the expedition reached the edge of human space, they found something that none of them had expected. The Sol system, Earth, Mars, the asteroid colonies, the outer settlements, was completely empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply empty. Every human facility had been carefully shut down and sealed. Every piece of equipment had been removed. Every sign of human presence had been erased, except for basic life support systems left running in empty buildings. The expedition teams that landed on Earth found cities that looked like they had been evacuated just days before. But scanning showed that the evacuation had been completed months earlier. There were no humans anywhere in their former territory. Not even graves or historical monuments had been left behind. The only thing the expedition found was a single communication beacon orbiting Earth. It had been waiting, broadcasting a message in every language spoken by Council species. Admiral Depthsinger gathered representatives from all 6 species on his flagship to hear the message together. The voice that spoke was calm and sad. Clearly human, but speaking with the authority of an entire species. To our former colleagues in the Galactic Council, the message began. If you are hearing this, it means you have come looking for us in our time of departure. We regret that we cannot be here to speak with you in person, but we hope this message will help you understand our decision. The message continued for several minutes, explaining humanity's choice to leave the galaxy. It spoke of disappointment and lost hope, but also of determination to find a new path among the stars. The humans had not left in anger, the message explained, but in sadness at what they saw as the galaxy's inability to grow beyond its conflicts and limitations. We came to the stars to find brothers and sisters among the cosmos, the voice said near the end. Instead, we found ourselves alone, surrounded by children who saw us only as caretakers and problem solvers. We choose to seek our destiny elsewhere, where perhaps we will find the family we sought, or build the civilization we dreamed of. The message ended with coordinates pointing toward the edge of the galaxy and beyond, into the empty space between star systems where no species had ever traveled. Admiral Depthsinger stood in silence as the message finished, surrounded by representatives who finally understood the magnitude of what they had lost. 5 years had passed since humanity's departure, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the prosperous, peaceful community it had once been. The great spiral arms that had once buzzed with trade ships and exploration vessels now echoed with the sounds of war and the silence of dead worlds. Chancellor Vexthai floated in what remained of the council chambers, his energy form dimmer than it had been in centuries. The great hall that had once hosted representatives from over 300 species now held fewer than 50. Some species had gone extinct. Others had withdrawn completely from galactic affairs. Many had simply stopped sending representatives to what they saw as meaningless gatherings. The ethereal collective, despite their advanced wisdom and long lives, had been forced to admit something that wounded their pride deeply. They had been wrong about humans. For centuries, Vexthai's people had looked down on humanity as a young, emotional species that would eventually mature into something more like themselves. They had seen human involvement in galactic affairs as a learning experience, a chance for humans to grow beyond their primitive need for physical interaction and emotional connection. Now they understood that it had been the other way around. Humans had not been learning from the galaxy's older species. They had been teaching them, patiently and quietly, how to work together despite their differences. "We thought we were the wise elders," Vexthai admitted to Dr. Hivness during one of their few remaining research sessions. "We believed that our million years of existence had taught us everything about civilization. But we never learned how to truly cooperate. We only learned how to coexist." Dr. Hivness, now one of the few remaining scholars still trying to understand what had happened, nodded sadly. Her research into human culture had become an obsession, trying to piece together what made them so uniquely capable of bringing different species together. "I have been studying their history," she said, pulling up holographic displays of human records. "Do you know what I found most remarkable? Humans spent their entire development as a species learning to work with others who were different from them. Their planet had hundreds of different cultures, thousands of different languages, millions of different ways of thinking. They spent millennia learning to find common ground." She gestured to another display showing human diplomatic records. "Every other species in the galaxy evolved in isolation until they reached space travel. We learned to cooperate with our own kind, then tried to apply those same methods to aliens. But humans learned to cooperate with aliens while they were still on their home planet. Every human was already an expert in dealing with beings who thought differently than they did. The military situation had become desperate. 3 major wars now raged across different sectors of the galaxy, and smaller conflicts erupted every month. The Krillian Empire had managed to conquer a dozen systems, but their brutal methods had sparked rebellions that they could not contain. Their military might was overwhelming, but they had no idea how to govern conquered peoples peacefully. Commander Zektar, now promoted to Supreme War Leader, stood in his command center looking at tactical displays that showed nothing but red warning lights. His empire was winning battles but losing the war. Conquered species refused to cooperate, sabotaged infrastructure, and launched suicide attacks against Krillian facilities. "How did the humans do it?" he asked his intelligence chief, a question that had been haunting him for months. "They maintained peace across the entire galaxy with fewer ships than we use in a single sector. They had no weapons of mass destruction, no fear tactics, no forced compliance, yet species obeyed them willingly." His intelligence chief, Colonel Targesh, had been studying human peacekeeping methods since the Empire's expansion began failing. "Sir, I believe the answer lies in something we have always considered weakness. The humans did not rule through strength, they ruled through trust." "Trust?" Zektar's forearms gestured dismissively. "Trust is earned through strength. Fear creates order." "No, sir," Targesh replied carefully. "Human records show that they created trust through service. When other species had problems, humans helped solve them without asking for payment or territory in return. When there were conflicts, humans mediated without taking sides for their own benefit. Over time, every species learned that humans could be trusted to be fair." Zektar stared at the tactical displays, showing rebellions across his conquered territory. "Fair," he repeated slowly. "They trusted humans to be fair." The economic collapse had reached levels that threatened basic survival for billions of beings. The Zephyrian Commerce Guild, once the most powerful economic force in the galaxy, had been reduced to managing trade within a single star system. Trade Minister Quindal had watched her life's work crumble as species after species withdrew from interstellar commerce. The problem was not just the lack of human protection for trade routes or human banks to provide stability. It was the complete breakdown of trust between species. Without humans to serve as neutral arbitrators, every business deal became a potential source of conflict. We prided ourselves on being master traders, Quindal explained to the few remaining guild members. We thought we understood commerce better than any species in the galaxy. But we never understood the most important part of trade: trust. She pulled up charts showing the collapse of interstellar commerce. Humans were not the best traders. Their ships were not the fastest. Their computers were not the most advanced. Their mathematical skills were not the most precise. But every species in the galaxy trusted them to honor their contracts and deal fairly. That trust was the foundation that made all commerce possible. The medical crisis had become a catastrophe. 17 different species were now facing extinction from diseases and health problems that human medical research had previously prevented or treated. The insectoid swarms had lost 40% of their population when their hive mind plague could not be controlled. The crystal beings were literally crumbling away without the atmospheric treatments that human engineers had maintained. Dr. Healing Touch of the empathic healers had tried to coordinate medical aid between species, but the task was overwhelming. Each species had developed medical knowledge specific to their own biology, and none had the broad understanding that human doctors had possessed. Humans were not the most advanced in any single area of medicine, she reported to the Emergency Health Council. The empathic healers understand biology better. The silicon constructs understand chemistry better. The energy beings understand physics better. But humans were the only species that tried to understand everyone. They studied medicine not just for themselves, but for every form of life they encountered. The most shocking revelation came when Dr. Heaveness finally managed to decode and analyze the complete records that humans had left behind. Working with scholars from 12 different species, she had spent 3 years piecing together humanity's full role in galactic civilization. The discovery was staggering. Humans had not just been mediators and peacekeepers. They had been quietly preventing disasters that other species never even knew were coming. Human scientists had been tracking asteroid impacts, solar flares, and cosmic radiation that threatened inhabited worlds. Human engineers had been maintaining infrastructure on thousands of planets. Human doctors had been monitoring and preventing disease outbreaks across the galaxy. We thought humans were helpful neighbors, Dr. Hivness announced to the Emergency Council session. In reality, they were the immune system of galactic civilization. They were constantly working to prevent problems before they became crises. She displayed a timeline showing human interventions over the past century. In the last 100 years alone, humans prevented 47 potential planetary disasters, stopped 32 disease outbreaks before they could spread, and resolved over 6,000 disputes before they could escalate to violence. And they did all of this quietly, without asking for recognition or reward. The council members sat in stunned silence as they realized the scope of what they had lost. The humans had not just been another member species. They had been the caretakers of the entire galactic community. But the most painful discovery was yet to come. Long-range sensors had finally detected signs of human activity at the edge of the galaxy. The massive ships that humans had built were not just colony vessels. They were entire cities, complete ecosystems designed for permanent life in the void between galaxies. The signals showed that humanity had not just survived their exodus, they were thriving. Their technology had advanced far beyond anything they had possessed while living in the galaxy. They had apparently spent years preparing for their departure, developing new sciences and technologies that would allow them to build a civilization in the empty space between star systems. The final message that the long-range sensors detected was not directed at the galaxy they had left behind. It was a greeting transmitted toward distant galaxies, a message of peace and friendship aimed at finding new civilizations among the far stars. Humanity had moved on. They were seeking new friends among the cosmos, leaving behind the galaxy that had never appreciated what they had given. 30 years had passed since the humans departed, and the galaxy had settled into its new reality. It was a darker, smaller place than it had been before, where once there had been a thriving community of hundreds of species working together. Now there were scattered clusters of allied worlds, each struggling to survive in an increasingly hostile universe. The Great Galactic Council building on the neutral world of Harmony Station had been abandoned for over a decade. Its halls, once filled with the voices of representatives from across the galaxy, now echoed only with the wind that blew through broken windows. The maintenance systems had failed years ago when the coalition of remaining species could no longer afford to keep them running. Young scholar Nimara of the new academic assembly walked through the ruins, her recorder capturing images and sounds for the historical archive she was building. She belonged to a generation that had never known the galaxy as it was before humanity's departure. To her, the stories of cooperation and peace seemed like myths from an ancient age. Nimara was one of the few beings still trying to understand what had happened. Most of the galaxy had moved on, accepting the new reality of constant conflict and isolation as normal. But she had grown up hearing her teacher, Dr. Hivness, speak about the time when different species worked together to solve problems and explore the universe. Dr. Hivness had died 5 years earlier, still working to preserve human records and study their culture. Before her death, she had given Nimara a special project: find and catalog every piece of human knowledge and technology that still existed in the galaxy. The task had taken Nimara to dozens of worlds and hundreds of abandoned facilities. What she found painted a picture of a species that had been more important to galactic civilization than anyone had realized. Even after 30 years of hindsight, on the crystal mining world of Shardtal, she found atmospheric processors that had been built by human engineers 50 years earlier and were still running perfectly, maintaining breathable air for 7 different species. The local administrators had no idea how the machines worked, but they knew that when similar processors built by other species had broken down, entire colonies had died. On the ocean world of Deep Current, she discovered water purification systems that human biochemists had designed to handle the complex chemistry needs of aquatic species. The systems had been running automatically for 3 decades, cleaning pollution and maintaining water quality across the planet's vast seas. Local scientists admitted they did not understand the technology well enough to repair it if it broke. Most remarkably, on the research station at Farpoint, Nimara found an entire laboratory that had been sealed by human scientists before their departure. Inside, she discovered something that would change her understanding of humanity forever. The laboratory contained detailed records of a project that humans had been working on in secret for over a century. It was called the Galactic Stability Initiative, and its scope was breathtaking. Human scientists had been using advanced computer modeling to predict problems that might affect galactic civilization decades or even centuries in advance. The records showed that humans had foreseen the economic collapse, the breakdown of cooperation, and even the specific wars that had torn the galaxy apart after their departure. They had spent generations quietly working to prevent these disasters, developing solutions and implementing safeguards that would keep the galactic community stable. But the most shocking discovery was a set of files labeled Departure Protocols. The records showed that humanity had been planning their exodus for nearly 200 years. They had seen that their role as galactic caretakers was preventing other species from learning to solve their own problems. Like parents who realize their children will never grow up if they continue to do everything for them, humans had decided that their departure was necessary for the galaxy's long-term development. The files contained detailed psychological profiles of every major species in the galaxy, along with predictions about how each would respond to humanity's absence. The predictions had been frighteningly accurate. The records showed that humans had hoped the crisis following their departure would eventually force other species to learn cooperation and self-reliance. But they had also prepared for the possibility that the galaxy might not survive their departure. Deep in the laboratory's storage systems, Nimara found something that made her cry tears of joy and sorrow at the same time. It was a complete backup of every piece of human knowledge and technology, along with detailed instructions for how other species could use it. The files included not just scientific data, but also guides for diplomacy, conflict resolution, economic management, and interspecies cooperation. It was humanity's final gift to the galaxy they had left behind. The backup had been programmed to activate automatically if galactic civilization's collapse reached critical levels. It had been waiting for 30 years, monitoring news broadcasts and data transmissions, ready to provide help if the galaxy truly needed it. Along with the technical data, Nimara found personal messages from individual humans to specific species, and even to people they had known. There was a message from Ambassador Sarah Chen to Chancellor Vex Tai, explaining her personal regret at humanity's decision to leave. There were research notes from human scientists to their alien colleagues, with suggestions for continuing their work. There were even messages from human children to alien friends they had played with, saying goodbye and wishing them well. But the most important discovery was a final message from humanity's leadership, addressed to whoever might find the archive. The message was delivered by an elderly human woman who identified herself as President Martinez, the last leader of the Terran Republic. To whoever finds this message, she began. We hope that you are seeking knowledge because your people have learned to work together, not because you are desperate for solutions to conflicts you cannot resolve. If you are hearing this because the galaxy is at peace and working to grow beyond its old limitations, then we are proud of what you have accomplished. The president's image paused, and her expression grew sad. But we fear that you are hearing this because the galaxy is in crisis. If that is true, please know that we never wanted your people to suffer. We left because we believed that our presence was preventing you from growing into what you could become. She gestured to data displays that showed the archive's contents. This archive contains everything we learned during our time in your galaxy, our science, our technology, our methods for cooperation and peace. We give it to you freely, as we always did when we lived among you. The message continued with detailed instructions for accessing and using the archive's contents. But it ended with a warning that broke Nimara's heart. This knowledge can help you rebuild what was lost, President Martinez said. But it cannot replace what you must learn for yourselves. We were able to keep peace because we understood that differences make us stronger, not weaker. We could solve problems because we believed that every species had value and deserved help. We could cooperate because we chose to trust each other rather than fear each other. The president's image looked directly at the camera, as if she could see Nimara watching 30 years in the future. The galaxy must choose its own path forward. We hope you will choose cooperation over conflict, trust over fear, and growth over stagnation. But the choice must be yours. The message ended with coordinates pointing toward the edge of the galaxy, where long-range sensors still occasionally detected signs of human activity. We have found new friends among distant stars, the president said. We are building the civilization we always dreamed of, with species who share our vision of what the universe can become. Our door is always open to those who seek to learn and grow, but we will never again serve as caretakers for those who refuse to mature. Nimara spent months studying the archive, understanding both its potential and its limitations. The technology could solve many of the galaxy's current problems. The knowledge could help species learn to cooperate again. The methods could restore the peace and prosperity that had been lost. But she also understood the message's deeper meaning. The archive was not a rescue. It was a final lesson. Humanity had given the galaxy everything it needed to succeed. But success would require the galaxy's species to change how they thought about each other and about themselves. As Nimara prepared to share her discovery with the remains of the Galactic Council, she looked up at the stars visible through the laboratory's windows. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the galaxy, humans were building something new among the distant lights. They had found the friends and family they had always sought, or they were creating them. The galaxy they had left behind faced a choice. It could use humanity's gift to rebuild what had been lost, or it could continue down the path of conflict and isolation. The humans had given them the tools, but the will to use them had to come from within. For the first time in 30 years, Nimara felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps her generation, the one that had grown up in the aftermath of humanity's departure, could learn from their predecessors' mistakes. Perhaps they could build something better than what had existed before. Or perhaps they would prove that humanity had been right to leave, seeking their destiny among species who were ready to reach for the stars together, rather than fighting over the scraps of what others had built. The choice belonged to the galaxy now. Humanity had moved on to greater things, leaving behind only their knowledge, their hope, and their final lesson in what it truly meant to grow up among the stars.